A scathing new report has found that intelligence was manipulated to paint a more optimistic picture of the administration's fight against ISIS. The report, released earlier today by a House Republican Joint Task Force, sparked by a whistleblower, shows intelligence gathered by U.S. Central Command was knowingly manipulated, in fact, downplaying the threat from ISIS. CENTCOM says it is reviewing the findings, but won't comment beyond because, well, of an ongoing investigation by the task force and another one by the Department of Defense's Inspector General. So with the fight against ISIS and terrorism obviously a central issue for voters, this could actually prove to be very significant. I want to bring in Steve Rogers, Christian Whiten, and Brad Ballman to help break it all down. Christian, I want to start with you on this thing. I don't get it. We've been hearing that things were going swimmingly. We're taking back territory. ISIS is on the run. And now we're not sure what to believe.
Right, and if you look at what's happening around the world, it doesn't match the talking points. There has been some geographic reduction to what ISIS controls in Iraq, but they still have a hinterland in Libya that's being pushed back as we speak. But they've spread dramatically throughout Southeast Asia, and they have operations in Europe. So these talking points are untrue, and now we find they are traced back to false, fictional intelligence, if you will. And, you know, Bush and Cheney took a lot of heat for supposedly putting political pressure on the intelligence people, but here we have a case that's much more clear of intelligence from our $50 billion a year intelligence community being falsified for political goals.
Brad, what would the excuse be for something like this? For morale purposes?
Well, number one, I just want to be clear. I know that gentleman just said that they're, expanding into Southeast Asia. I want to be clear on this. ISIS, while a serious threat, the war on ISIS is being prosecuted very strongly by this administration and by the Defense Department. And any notion that they're not is absolutely ridiculous. Now, let's also be clear on another thing. To mislead the American people is never something that should ever be done. And there is no excuse to mislead the American people. And to my knowledge, nobody is actually saying that this report is misleading the American people. What's actually at issue here are a couple of facts and figures that may have been spoken about in such a way that can be debated. But right. To say here that this rises to the level of, say, yellow cake in the Bush administration, where they very clearly lied to get us into war, is something absolutely ridiculous.
It's far worse. And listen, an American student was killed by ISIS in Bangladesh because she couldn't recite the Quran. The commander of CENTCOM, the four-star general, misled Congress because this phonied up intelligence went into his testimony. This is a big deal.
Let me bring in Steve Rogers, Lieutenant Steve Rogers. Does this make the distinction so far from what you know of being a straight-out lie or just embellishing a little bit?
I'll tell you what I do know, Charles. First of all, the war is not, I repeat, is not being prosecuted decisively because of the political correctness of this administration. The hands of our military are tied. Second of all my years working with military intelligence, I have never heard nor seen military personnel in uniform skew any type of intelligence. Now, this had to be on the orders of someone outside the military. This is like Vietnam. In Vietnam, they had skewed the body bag count so that the American people would not get too concerned about the prosecution of the war. They are doing the same thing here. This is for political purposes, and military people would not do this because by doing this, they're putting the lives of their very own fellow troops in danger.
Brad, if it turns out that this is true, though, what would you think?
Well, first off, let me be clear. I share the panelists' view of our military and our armed forces, and I'm certainly not claiming or saying that anybody in uniform did this intentionally or unintentionally. But let's not turn this into something that is equivalent to what happened under the Bush administration, where the Bush administration and Vice President Cheney lied to get us into war with Iraq, which caused this situation to begin with, which has led to the deaths of tens of thousands of American lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. To create some sort of moral equivalency here at this point is just absolutely crazy, and it's, probably a little bit premature.
I know that's the old get out of jail card. We did something awful and wrong and deceiving, but. And I don't know. I don't think it's working anymore, Brad. But listen, we're finished with the segment. We've run out of time, but I appreciate it. You guys are all three great, and I'm sure we'll be talking about a lot more of this when we come in the coming days. Thanks a lot. In the
for-
meantime.